everybody, and welcome back to the Oil and Gas Rundown here at King Operating. Thank you so much for joining us live today. My name is Rachel Griffith, and I'm an SVP here at King Operating, joined with a few gentlemen from our operations team today. Ryan Goeres, one of our engineers here at King Operating, and Mark Ayers, one of our geologists. And just today, gentlemen, before we start, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some obvious events that are happening in the world today. And I really want to mention, first off, the sacrifice of some of our great American men and women who have fought in this war and have lost their lives. And of course, there's no greater sacrifice than to lay down your life for your country and, for a noble cause. And so I just want to mention the service members that we have by name. I believe there were six service members so far that have lost their lives, and 4 that we have the names of: Captain Cody A. Cork, age 35, from Winter Haven, Florida; Sergeant First Class Noah T. Hens, 42, of Bellevue, Nebraska; and Sergeant First Class Nicole Amore, 39, of White Bear Lake, Minnesota; and Sergeant Declan Coday, age 20, of West Des Moines, Iowa. And I just want to say, from everybody here at King Operating, we're so thankful for the dedication of our servicemen and women who are willing to go out and fight for our country. And it is truly an honor just to have such devoted people in our military and all around the world. So a thank you to them, and just condolences and prayers to their families. But, not just to the Americans that have lost their lives, but our hearts go out to everybody affected by this war. And war affects civilians across the globe. It affects the Iranian people, and our hearts and our prayers go out to those civilians that have also lost lives. War, even if it's believed it's needed or not, it is devastating, the loss of life that can occur. And so our prayers are with not just Americans, but Iranians and those in the Middle East who are navigating through this. We really do pray for Iran and for the Persian people that, we want to see a free and prosperous Iran. And so today we just, want to take a moment of silence to just recognize everybody involved in this and to pray for a quick resolution. Thank you, everybody. So just transitioning from that, looking at a little bit, I'm just going to touch a little bit on the broad outlook here of oil and gas. And when there's some disruption, of course, in the market, as we're seeing right now, definitely causes a little bit of market volatility. That always makes prices jump a little bit. We've seen some spikes up, 8 points up, and, looking at the broad outlook, it's going to take a little time to see if things settle back down. Right now, we are seeing higher crude prices, not knowing how long this is going to last. That could end up being higher prices at the pump, which we don't always want to see for consumers in a balance of economy. But I think overall, it's going to take a little time to see how this develops, how this affects broader markets in the oil industry, as the Strait of Hormuz is basically closed right now and not operating. So it's going to take a little bit of time to see how this plays out for the broader market. Of course, stock market, we're seeing a lot of dips and shakes and jumps. And of course, when the stock market is down, that means sometimes that oil prices are up. That's usually the offset between markets and owning hard assets and commodities. So something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on and be bringing you more updates. We'll be having a live webinar as well with John Molden, our chief economist, who is really going to break down Iran, oil, and the markets next Tuesday. So if you'd like to register for that, please make sure to comment below or just reach out to us on kingoperating.com. So switching off of global events today, we're going to talk a little bit now about what we usually do, which is practicalities in the oil and gas industry. Hopefully bringing you some information and education on our industry and help you get a better look at what we do, what all of us do here at King Operating, and how our industry works. So, Ryan, I just want to shift over to you and talk about, from a petroleum engineering standpoint, when we see some global supply, become uncertain, how does the industry respond operationally? Are there ways that producers can adjust production and efficiency in the short term, or what does that look like from a engineering standpoint?
Yeah, sure, Rachel. On a global scale, there's actually very little that can be done to respond to short-term or particularly even longer, mid to long-term shortages, aside from drilling more wells and getting those wells on production. I think what you're referring to is spare production capacity. And for the most part, outside of OPEC, the world doesn't really have much. Certainly, we don't in the United States. For the most part, we produce our wells at their full capability of production all the time. And so, inside of OPEC, there is some spare capacity. Spare capacity being something that can be brought on in 30 to, I don't remember what the technical definition of it is, but it's probably 30 to 90 days, right? So we're talking about production that we brought on in a number of weeks. And inside of OPEC, there is a little bit. I think it's primarily held by Saudi Arabia. Maybe the UAE has some. I don't really know who has that. I'm not real versed in the topic necessarily, but last time I heard, maybe 3, 4, 5 million barrels a day of production. So, that it's not a lot if there are production upsets, globally. And so beyond that, there are strategic petroleum reserves that various governments hold. I know even less about that topic, but those do take some time to come online, and they can provide blunting for real short-term spikes, but they're not designed to provide long-term or even kind of mid-term production replacements. So anything that we can realistically do as an industry takes many months, right? You have to permit and drill and then complete and bring on production. So that's the sort of, in a nutshell, what we can, or more specifically can't do.
Mm-hmm. Talking about OPEC, Ryan, you want to just give everybody you're mentioning OPEC, and I know for us in oil and gas, it's a big name. Everybody, obviously has an idea of OPEC, but for people watching out there, would you just break down a little bit about who OPEC is, what they do?
Well, they're effectively just a group of countries that are major exporters of oil, and it pretty much, I don't know the origins of exactly what countries were in and out when it started, but primarily Middle Eastern countries. You've got others involved, of course, and they effectively get together and talk about production quotas and output, things that we do not do in the United States, not legal for us to do. And they will attempt to manipulate or change the supply or price of oil globally. They're not as effective at that as they used to be, because they control less of the world's oil and gas production as a percentage compared to what they used to, but still a big chunk of production there that they can bring to bear.
Yeah, and I think that's really been America's goal, was to be able to produce enough oil and gas and hydrocarbons that we weren't affected by OPEC raising prices and manipulating supply and demand, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a big one, but there's still big players in the game right now, and always, having their hand in the market and what prices are doing. So thank you for that, Ryan. I just wanted people to get an understanding. So many times I feel like, especially in oil and gas, we use certain names or terms, and a lot of people out there watching might be like, who is OPEC? Who is this OPEC you're talking about? So thank you for that. All right, Ryan. So another question, just based on engineering, for viewers who don't understand the engineering side of the industry, can you briefly explain what petroleum engineers actually do, whether that's for safety, efficiency, when you're producing oil and gas. Just tell us what you do, Ryan.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty big universe of different, disciplines and parts of our industry there. But in general, I think the best way to look at petroleum engineers as petroleum engineers effectively evaluate um, potential drilling locations as well as reserves in the ground, and they plan and oversee and evaluate the operations that develop those reserves and produce those reserves. So, you're talking about anything from the actual drilling operations, completions, fracking operations, to then, maximizing production, minimizing our impact to the environment, um, evaluating from an economic standpoint, what kind of reserves are in a given reservoir, what kind of potential it may have left. I mean, that's sort of the range of the discipline. Kind of specialized when it comes to engineers in general, like compared to, say, a mechanical or an electrical engineer. A little more specialized, but certainly a range of specialties within the petroleum engineering ranks as well.
So what was something, when you first, graduated and started in petroleum engineering, what was one of the first things that you did?
Well, I personally started as a production engineer on a water flood. Not uncommon to start as a production engineer. Some folks don't. Some folks go straight into drilling. Some folks go straight into reservoir engineering. But I was a production engineer looking after an older field and trying to optimize production.
How did you do that?
Well, I mean, production engineering is sort of a process of monitoring what's going on, figuring out if what is going on could be going on better, if we could be
Yeah.
doing better at it, and
Yeah.
then applying those changes to the wells. So
Awesome. So really getting into the nitty-gritty of certain data points or metrics and seeing if they can be better or enhanced or more economical.
yeah, looking at production, looking at revenue, looking at operating expenses, how the fields are, even, producing, consolidating batteries if you need to get more efficient. That was one thing that I did way back then. I don't don't remember a lot from 24 years ago, but I remember a little. Yeah, it's a pretty wide range of things, but.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan, for walking us through some of the engineering things in the petroleum industry. So shifting over to Mark Ayers, our geologist. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Doing good, Rachel.
Great. Well, Mark, I just wanted to kind of walk through again, and I know I have you do this a lot, but people love to learn about the geology. Not that people don't love to learn about the engineering, Ryan. It's interesting
boring.
for some.
Engineering is boring, so.
Color within the
Technology is way
line.
more interesting, right?
Stay within the line. But geology is something that definitely fascinates a lot of people, and I was, just kind of walking through some of the elementary steps with my daughter Samara, and she's actually a high schooler, but breaking down some of the things that you do. So maybe just kind of again go from a basic standpoint. Let's talk about what ultimately determines where oil and gas exists in the first place, where it is in these basins. How do geologists identify the promising areas, the promising formations, and begin to drill?
Well, first off, geology is sort of a unique thing also because you start out studying basic physical processes on the earth, learning how the rocks are deposited. And then ultimately, after you finish your education, you go into the oil business and you learn how to put all those things into application. And it takes imagination. I think that's probably one of the first things. You have to be able to take true data and merge it with creative ideas and hope to find oil and gas. The easiest way to find oil and gas, they always say, is If you drill under an oak tree, you're likely to find an acorn, or you're likely to find oil if you drill in an oil patch. But you're also likely not to find a really good well either. So I always say, when I first started back 44 years ago at Conoco, that I never drilled a dry hole for the first year, but I never really drilled a very good well either, because at that time, everybody was expecting that oil would be $100 a barrel, thanks to OPEC. And economics, really, everything was positive. We were desperately trying at Conoco to reverse our decline in the Rocky Mountains. And so we went out and we drilled a lot of wells. Every time, once in a while, we'd get one that was a great surprise and would be really good, but it wasn't the kind of thing that would move the industry forward. We've had to get a lot more creative over the years. So what does it take to find oil or gas? Well, first you've got to find a place where the oil is residing in the subsurface. It could be holes inside of sandstones or limestones. And now we found out it can actually be in shales, which we didn't used to think of that as a potential place to find oil or gas, but that's a lot of the resource plays now are that way. So when we figure out where the storage capacity is, what's going to trap it? Is it on a structural feature? That was, in the old days, that's what you always wanted to drill. You want to drill on a high. Although some of the biggest fields that were discovered were drilled stratigraphic traps, like in East Texas. People thought they were drilling on structural features, and in fact, what they were drilling was a huge pinch out of sands coming up and pinching out to the east, and they had a huge discovery. So you start out trying to look for what would trap that oil or gas, because the oil, the basic fundamental thing we rely on is oil is lighter than water. And if we have water in the subsurface, which we have everywhere, when there's a pore, there's always some fluid in that, oil is going to migrate to the top of it. So now, where do we go looking for it? Well, there are very few direct hydrocarbon indicators. The only place where we can actually find things that technology will tell us this is where the oil is in, say, the Gulf of Mexico. We have some things that are direct hydrocarbon indicators in 3D seismic. And it's great when you have that, but you have to have the seismic across it. And then, of course, when you're dealing with the Gulf of Mexico, everybody out there sees the same information. And so when we go to bid for the leases, we have to bid in a competitive environment. And the one with the highest bids is the one that usually wins it with, as far as the mineral management service. And so what it sort of does, it makes the playing field level. So if you're drilling something that is not a lot of high risk, if you have some good confidence that this is where the reserves or oil is going to be located, then you're probably going to pay a real high entry cost to get into it. Conversely, if you come in the United States and we're going to drill, let's say in a resource play, one of the things that's really happened in resource plays like the Permian Basin is the cost of land has gone through the roof. I remember when we were trying to buy acreage for $200 an acre, and we ended up having somebody bought acreage for $60,000 an acre. And that was stunning to me. I mean, growing up in the patch with drilling vertical wells and stuff, I couldn't imagine anybody spending that much money. But ultimately, by drilling all the wells they've done and the way that they've drilled them, they've actually justified it by the production. But that was a whole different kind of a prospect. And then now you're drilling side by side, you're drilling in a very competitive environment. Most everybody knows what you're going to find when you drill the well. So then something's going to give. It's a very competitive business. Somebody's going to either pay more in terms of royalties to the mineral owners that actually own those minerals, or they're going to pay more to in terms of lease bonuses to acquire those minerals. And so that's where creativity comes in this business. And that is, you want to find a place where you can convince people to spend their money, and sometimes it's a lot of money, to test your idea. Now, I don't know if anybody's watched this Landman episode, and I don't always watch it, but there's one episode in there that I really love, and that's this very handsome geologist, of course. I don't qualify for that, but anyway, he's talking about a prospect he wants to drill, and he says, look, this is a great prospect. It could be 2 TCF of gas. It's wonderful. And he says, it's got a 10% chance of working. Well, that's a seasoned geologist. The geologist that comes out and says every prospect he drills is 100% likely to be successful. People that hear that should be very cautious. It either means that it's not a very creative idea that you're drilling under the oak tree looking for stuff that we know is there, and you're not likely to find anything really big there. Or it means that he's being dishonest with you about understanding the kind of risks we face. So King is an example of getting into something we're doing. We're drilling at an existing oil and gas field. We know that the oil is there on our Bivin Ranch project, but what we're trying to do is find where we can maximize the production by the way we optimize, and this is what Ryan was talking about, optimizing how we drilled the wells, where we land them, so that when we stimulate them with fracs, we recover more hydrocarbon. That's a whole different kind of risk than if you go out into an international play where you have no proven production and you're drilling maybe $120 million well, and sometimes, a lot of times, almost every time we find oil or gas in those wells, but it's really rare where we find enough oil or gas to make sense to develop it. There again, that's where Ryan's ilk of individual comes from, because they've got to decide how much money can we afford to invest in trying to develop this hydrocarbon that we see in the well that we just drilled. And it's a tough challenge. When you can spend $1 billion to develop a field, you've got to make sure you're spending it on the right things.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I've covered a lot of territory there, but
no, that's perfect.
I'm gonna just have fun.
I remember that episode because they were doing, that's when they wanted to do the offshore drilling. And actually, they were mad at that geologist because they wanted him to kind of shut down the idea. And even though he gave an honest, approximation of 10%, Demi Moore was willing to take the risk based on the possible outcome of that 10%. And they were kind of mad at him for what he said, if you remember that, Mark. But that was a great episode.
Yeah. And I thought of you.
I thought of you.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I first started at Conoco, when you presented a prospect to management, you were always 100% sure it was going to work. And, it seemed totally dishonest to me to start doing that. Now, this was back in the late 70s, so I'm sure that they've changed a lot now, because I haven't been there for 40 some years. But now we look at things on an economic basis. Guys like Ryan do economic evaluation, and we look at the risk of the project working, and we make a decision. Is this project worth spending that much money understanding what we don't know about it and what we think we know about it? And that's a real challenge. And I think that's where a more experienced person, like the handsome guy on Landman, brings some advantage to the table. Because if you got a young guy like I used to be coming right out of college, man, I believed in my ideas, and I pound the table for those ideas. It only took me about 20 years to realize that they weren't always right. And I have to start deciding what it is that helps me know how likely we are to be successful.
Well, Mark, I just have to say, I thought that you guys definitely looked alike. I saw the similarity.
Yeah, I especially the hair and
yeah, just the ruggedness all together, the whole thing. I thought it was very evenly matched. So, I mean, definitely both had the geologist vibe going on. So
it was funny because I used to think that being a geologist meant that you were tough and rugged, and because when you're in school, that's what you do. You go out and look at rocks, and I always thought that was a pretty bold thing. And then I started watching the Friends episode where one of the guys, I can't remember what he is, everybody thought he was a nerd, and that hurt my feelings. And then I watched I can't think of the other one. Oh, with the Sheldon, whatever that was.
Oh, yeah.
And there, the geologist was a big time nerd. And I thought, wow, that's hurting my ego. So
yeah, because we always talk about that they're the adventurers, the wild ones out there, rugged. But I'm sorry, definitely you're not a nerd, Mark.
Well, we spend all our time looking at computers now. We rarely go out in the field. So
oh, well, no, I think between you and Landman, you guys are really reviving the look of what the real geologist is. Okay. You guys are bringing back the truth of how geologists really look. All right. You and Landman, Mark, you're doing it.
I'll get a the next episode. Yeah.
So, all right, Mark. So we know that we are in the US. We're going to need more production. We're going to need to actually, not us necessarily at King, but there is going to need to be more exploratory work done, correct? And how does geology factor into this? How, how does an understanding, maybe, I don't know, improved mapping or something, how is that going to play into maybe the next phase of, U.S. oil and gas exploration?
Well, one of the ways we can do it is literally in the Permian Basin, it's essentially become a manufacturing process. That's really different than what people used to think of as a prospect. But we know now the question is how much oil we get out of each one of these horizontals we drill. We drill 16 wells per section. I mean, it's incredible. And it's become a manufacturing process as opposed to the old days where you went out and did a wildcat. You went out and drilled somewhere where you were hoping to find oil based on an idea. And that's a difference, but there's still that opportunity in this country. We don't do that at King because that's something that we're not equipped to do. But I honestly believe there's an incredible amount of hydrocarbon left in this country and what we call stratigraphic traps. Those are the hardest things to define. And that's because you don't really see it on seismic. You sometimes have well information that says, hey, I'm down here and I've got a lot of water in this sandstone and a little bit of hydrocarbon on top of it. And I think if I go to the east, the sandstone is going to pinch out and it'll be trapped and they'll be full of hydrocarbon. Well, that's a stratigraphic trap. And that is where I think there's still lots of potential in this country for conventional exploration. But to be quite honest with you, the things that we've been doing more recently are either going subsalt in the Gulf of Mexico, where there are huge reserves. And that's one of those where you have to be really certain about going to full development because putting in the platform is extraordinarily expensive. And you're using seismic that you have to image underneath salt, which is very difficult, although we've gotten very, very good at it. Or we come in, we try to do the manufacturing thing. Just like at Bivens Ranch, we know we're going to find oil and gas every time we drill a well. Can we find enough oil and gas to make a big impact? And we, of course, think we can there. But that goes on every day all over this country, people trying to do that very thing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, it does. No, it does. I love that because I mean, I agree. I think a lot of people agree there's still a lot left to be found in this country. I mean, what do you think, Brian?
What Mark said.
Still out there?
He's not going to.
Yeah, I think there's plenty out there left to drill. It's a matter of at what oil price is it going to be economic to take the risk?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, or which state you're in. I mean, we know California has reserves, but currently they're buying from out of the country. So those are interesting dynamics. Of course, across the US, each state is different as well on what they'll allow as far as drilling and production, correct?
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Different. Some states have made it extremely difficult.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting.
Which really just leads to importing more oil from somewhere else. And we make it cleaner and safer than I'm convinced than anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely. We're at least, I mean, as far as even our environmental standards have come up a lot. So that there's some good practices in place for production and even environmentally. But I think the West Coast is going to have some struggles coming up in the near future if they don't fix some things on that side. But for us here in Texas, we're happy to drill away. And just wrapping up today's oil and gas rundown, we're just thankful everybody took the time to join us today. We'll be back here next Wednesday at the same time. So please make sure to connect with us at kingoperating.com. Remember, there is that John Malden webinar coming up on Tuesday that we'll be talking about Iran oil and the markets if you would like to join us. So from everybody here at King Operating, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. We'll see y'all next time.